Hi, I'm Thomas Fraser-Bacon, and today I'm joined by my colleague Cameron Mills to talk about a few topics that we think may be of interest to our partners. We feel like our insight may help them plan their next stage of marketing activities and commercial strategies. These are all based on frequently asked questions that we're getting from our partners to our sales team. So, hi Cameron, good morning.
Morning.
Thanks for joining us today and taking the time to discuss these topics. If you'd like to give a little introduction as to what you do within the company?
No problem. So I'm the UK Sales Support Manager. So my general role is to support the account managers in the UK team. It means I've got my ears to the ground quite a lot of the time. I'm involved in all of their projects. So I typically have a very good understanding of kind of where we're selling products and where we're not. I've been with the company just shy of 4 years now. So I think I've got a very good understanding of kind of how we operate and what we've done over the years. Hopefully this should be quite useful for our partners.
Okay, excellent. So without any further ado, we'll jump into the first topic. So what have been our best-selling products during the pandemic?
So one significant increase that we saw was outdoor screens. So naturally, with the pandemic, people had to move indoor activities outdoors. And so naturally, people were wanting larger screens to go outdoors and needed to be IP rated. So we saw quite a significant increase in sales of those products. Typically that was equating to around 20% of our sales in previous years. I think that's significantly increased. We're probably up to around 35% of our sales. So that was significant. We've also, in recent years, released our battery-powered outdoor A-board screen. So that's been very useful because people have been having to place them at entrances to display COVID-related signage of, please wear a mask, keep your distance and such. Another increase that we saw was our digital menu board range. So during the pandemic, those that did well were typically the takeaways and restaurants that could provide, takeout meals and so could continue throughout the pandemic. So some of them will have even seen an increase in sales. So this extra capital they've wanted to push into retrofit and preparing for the years to come. So we've seen a lot of takeaways who have invested, converting from traditional menu signage into the digital, even adding screens to the window. Now, you might presume that obviously footfall is reduced, but they're making the investment for the future. And that future's coming. Obviously, with the vaccine and the progress we're making there, we're hopefully on the cusp of moving back into those footfall numbers. Some partners during the pandemic had some concerns about stock. Fortunately, in the year prior to the pandemic, we actually built this new office and significantly sized warehouse. And so during the early days of the pandemic, when everything was quiet, we were bringing in stock from our factory. So we've pretty much filled our warehouse. We've got 1,300 pallet capacity. So that's meant that we've been able to hold stock. And now that obviously there's the impacts of Brexit along with COVID, we're very fortunate to have done that because as some other competitors are running out of stock, we're not suffering the same woes.
Okay, you mentioned about the outdoor A-board. I know that many of our partners have actually kind of pivoted in a way and added that to their COVID range based on the flexibility. Obviously, it can be used anywhere. It can be updated quickly, USB, using our online CMS, using third-party software. But I know that we've obviously also developed a couple of particular ranges specifically to tackle challenges related to COVID. So starting with the hand sanitizer display, for example, what have sales of that been like?
So the sales of the hand sanitizer display were quite interesting, really. So this was a display that would never have come to be if COVID didn't come into existence. We would have never created a screen that had a hand sanitizer dispenser. It wasn't the type of product we typically created, but we had a need, we created it, and then ultimately, especially during the early stages of the pandemic, sales were some of the best we've ever seen in a product, especially in a new product. So literally, we couldn't have them arrive from the factory quick enough to fulfill the orders we were receiving. They've continued. The COVID is going nowhere for at least the next few months, so it's continued there. And ultimately, with some of the promotions we've been running on that product, there is a significant, benefit to purchasing it not just as a COVID-related product, but also as a product to be used later. And the value is significant in just it being a 22-inch screen that can utilise our CMS and is offering the standard benefits that we offer with our commercial grade screens: 24/7 usage, higher brightness, many different features that we offer there.
I think one thing that's obviously been lost in the shuffle as well throughout the pandemic is obviously, again, I've got a quote from the World Health Organization here that hand hygiene is one of the most effective actions to reduce the spread of COVID-19 virus. So obviously, hand sanitizers, like you say, initially were hugely popular, but obviously that's one thing I think that's been kind of lost a little bit. But also, one thing I think that would kind of help our partners is to kind of think of the post-COVID benefits. So again, from a recent study that I found from the Bradley Corporation, 88% of people have said that they'll maintain an increased hand hygiene regime even after COVID's passed. So I think kind of thinking of those longer term benefits as well, and obviously our partners passing that on to their customers, I think will also be helpful. What about our facial recognition display? What have you found sales like that of that product to be like?
Again, that's a product where we've had more significant sales than I personally had expected. Originally, that type of product had seen popularity in the Asian markets, where obviously technologically they're typically more significant. So I think I had anticipated that it was perhaps something that we would bring out and would not see the sales that we were hoping, but that's not been the case. I think ultimately, because our solution is so simple and its core, at its core of the thermometer and checking temperature, and then also identifying whether someone's wearing a mask, requires no external software. It's just plug it in, power it up, and it's used. Means that if you want to implement multiple at an entryway, it takes a few minutes to set up. There are some added benefits to using the software that we provide free of charge. That's where the facial recognition comes into play, and you can use it for clocking in and clocking out staff. So these are some of the benefits that you'll see for use after the pandemic. But what I will say is that the features that are used kind of pandemic specific, those are the core features that right now are quite an easy sell. People need this type of technology, and it's less in your face. Ultimately, people walking up and holding the temperature gun to your face is very intrusive, as opposed to, could you please walk over and just place your face in front of this screen so they can check your temperature and check you're wearing a mask. That's quite an easy thing to get people to do.
Absolutely. Just moving on to the next topic then. So what types of our partners and their end users have done well during the pandemic from your perspective?
So one really interesting thing that I've seen during the pandemic is we've seen a bit of a resurgence in the high street upstart. So obviously, as larger companies, the likes of Debenhams and other larger retailers have kind of removed themselves from the high street, reduced their number of stores, and left quite a few vacant stores, there have been smaller kind of upstarts and strange little niches that have decided, okay, now's the time for us to take the risk. We'll take over these stores, and hopefully we'll be able to benefit from that. And so we've seen the likes of indoor trampolining activity centres have taken over large Debenhams stores. I mean, a really interesting figure is that if you take a look at the 2019 Forbes 500 list, 24% of that list were actually created during a recession. It's typically in times of financial hardship where a lot of these new and innovative companies can come into the marketplace and actually punch a hole in the market share of the big boys. So I think that's something that's been a really interesting thing to happen there. Okay. Another thing that is a really interesting thing to think about is how will some of these markets return? Now, we've seen some people have been not just surviving, but some have been thriving during the pandemic, but others have not done so well. So the likes of exhibition companies and specifically hospitality have really struggled during the pandemic. Hospitality really especially. But it's interesting to think, is that going to be a gradual return? As we've got the whole populace vaccinated, will it be a slow return to their original figures? Or will a combination of reduced competition from many hotels having to close and potentially a little bit of wanderlust from the general populace of wanting to get out of a setting that they've been in for likely nearly 2 years at that point? Will it be that there's just a sudden onslaught of business to hospitality? I think it'd be really interesting to see kind of how that goes and whether it is one or the other.
Okay. Again, from my perspective, I think our partners that have kind of done well during this period are the ones that have really kind of stepped their game up. invested more in social media promotion, just general advertising, email shots, real kind of active sales. And they've kind of gone after and targeted the businesses that, like you mentioned earlier, the ones that haven't really kind of had to close during lockdown, the ones that have remained open and potentially got some kind of expendable income, such as convenience stores, supermarkets, fast food, as you mentioned earlier again, garden centres, even like mobile phone repair shops with high brightness screens being popular in those kind of locations. So that was that's one thing that I noticed. Definitely, and what I'll say as well, I was actually coincidentally having a conversation with my mechanic the other day, local mechanic, and he said, during all of the lockdowns, they remained open because obviously they need to provide these services, especially to the likes of the NHS, who obviously need to get to work. So they've seen a lot of increased new business where, other businesses have had to close, so they've become one of the very few options for them to come to. So they've actually gained significant new market share because of the pandemic. So, there are some businesses that have actually done quite well out of it. Yeah, I think it's important for our partners to kind of, identify those businesses and try and target the ones that they kind of can go after best with, the most relevant products as well. 100%. Okay. Cameron, thanks again for joining us today. I won't take up any more of your time. I know you're a busy man. I feel like some of the things we've discussed today could give a little bit of insight and really kind of help our partners. So thanks again, really appreciate it. No problem at all. I hope it's useful. Excellent. If you'd like to discuss any of the topics we've spoke about today or anything else at all, you can get in touch with myself, Cameron, or your dedicated account manager, and we'll do everything we can to help.